In the middle of my lavish 72nd birthday party, my daughter pushed a green silk box toward me. It took me 6 months to find this gift. Just as I was about to open it, my 8-year-old grandson rushed forward screaming, "Don't open it!" I ignored him. But when the box popped open, what lay inside made the blood in my veins turn to ice. I'm really glad you're here for this one. Before we begin, drop a quick comment for me. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night, where you are right now? Every comment genuinely helps me know you're listening. Some elements in this story are fictionalized to strengthen the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. I didn't know that the text from my daughter at 6:47 a.m. that Saturday would be the last message I'd ever fully trust from her. The morning light was just beginning to cut across Lake Travis when my phone vibrated on the oak desk where I'd sat for 40 years. At 72, I still woke before dawn, still worked weekends, still signed documents in the same second-floor study where I'd built Sterling Energy Holdings from a single oil rig into something worth $120 million. Silver-haired and stubborn as the Texas bedrock beneath my first well, I'd outlasted competitors' recessions and 3 rounds of chemotherapy that tried to tell me I was done. The text glowed on the screen. "Daddy, I've put your present in the gift room. I want you to open it first tonight. Vivienne." My daughter, 32 and executive vice president, who'd always been the child who texted early and planned everything 6 months ahead. Traits I'd once called ambitious. Traits I'd rewarded with promotions and corner offices, and the kind of trust you only give to family. I typed back with the same thick fingers that had once turned valve wheels on drilling platforms. "Okay, sweetie." Outside, the November sky was turning that particular shade of orange that only happens in Texas, the kind that makes you believe the oil business was destiny rather than choice. I set down the phone and looked at the stack of quarterly reports in front of me, then passed them to the framed photograph on the corner of my desk. My wife Margaret and me 20 years ago, standing in front of our first commercial property. Her smile in that photo could have powered Houston. 72 years old today. Built this empire from nothing but a high school diploma and a willingness to work 18-hour days in 100-degree heat. I should have been thinking about the party that night. The catering staff, the guest list, the speech Margaret had probably written for me to give. Instead, I was thinking about the text, about the gift room, about how Vivienne had said first, with such careful emphasis. The gift had been the first thing I'd opened tonight. I realize now, sitting here months later with lawyers and investigators and federal agents, asking me to remember every detail, that was the moment she confirmed the hidden trap was in place. Not a bomb or a gun, but something far more elegant. Something wrapped in blue silk with a card that said, "Happy Birthday, Daddy," in handwriting, that matched every Father's Day card I'd saved in the bottom drawer of this very desk. But let me take you back 5 days to the Monday Leo arrived. The main hall of Sterling residence has 20-foot ceilings and a marble floor that cost more than my first house. I was standing in the center of it that afternoon when the front doors opened and my grandson came through them like pure joy in sneakers. Grandpa, Leo Harrington, 8 years old, with his mother's dark eyes. But my own stubborn jaw ran straight at me with the kind of reckless certainty that only children possess. I knelt my knees protesting, but my heart overruling them, and caught him in a hug that smelled like grape juice and playground dust and everything good about having grandchildren. "My boy," I said into his hair, "we're going to have the best week together. I brought my chess set," he announced, "and Mom says you have a pool." Behind him, Vivienne stood in the doorway with her leather bag and that expression she wore when she wanted something. "Professional, pleasant, practiced. I thought he could stay with you all week during Thanksgiving," she said. "You need a young person around Daddy." I stood keeping one hand on Leo's shoulder. "You're always thinking of me." "Someone has to." She stepped into the hall, and I remember thinking she looked tired. Lines around her eyes I hadn't noticed before. the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. I can pick him up Saturday after your party, she continued. That gives you two almost a full week. He's excited about helping with the decorations. Leo was already running toward the grand staircase, calling back something about seeing his room. Careful on the stairs, I shouted, then turned back to Vivienne. You sure you don't want to stay for dinner? Board meeting prep. The energy sector report is due Friday. She walked further into the hall, and I thought she was looking at me. But now I understand she was looking past me. Her eyes moved in a pattern I didn't recognize because I wasn't watching for it. Left to the hallway junction where the east wing met the main corridor. Up to the ceiling corner where I'd installed the new security cameras after the break-in attempt last spring. Right to the service entrance that led to the kitchen and staff quarters. Counting, mapping, planning. The cameras work well, she asked. I barely registered the question. Hugh says the new system covers everything. Motion sensors the works. Though I told him it was overkill. You can never be too careful, Daddy. She kissed my cheek, lavender perfume, the same brand she'd worn since college, and was gone before I could offer her coffee. I didn't see my daughter's eyes at that moment. If I had, everything might have been different. Leo's laughter echoed from upstairs, something about finding a telescope in the guest room. I headed toward the sound, thinking about chess games and pool days, and maybe teaching him to read a geological survey map the way my own father had taught me. I didn't look back at the doorway. I didn't see Vivienne pause on the front steps, pull out her phone and type a message to someone I'd never met. Didn't see her photograph the security panel by the entrance or the way she glanced at her watch, and then at the position of the sun through the western windows. At precisely 7:14 p.m. that Saturday evening, 46 minutes before the party, Vivienne walked into the gift room carrying something that would nearly end my life. I wouldn't learn about this moment until 3 days later, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in my arms and Leo sitting in the chair beside me, finally ready to break the promise his mother had extracted. What I'm about to tell you comes from an 8-year-old boy's memory, recounted in whispers, while his father stood guard at the door to make sure Vivienne couldn't walk in. The gift room at Sterling Residence is what the architect called a receiving parlor, a small space off the main hall where guests could leave coats and packages. That evening it held 27 wrapped presents on 2 long tables draped in cream linen. Vivienne's blue silk box sat in the center of the second table, larger than the others, positioned like a centerpiece. She closed the door with the kind of gentle care that makes no sound. Leo told me she looked around twice, her gaze moving across the ceiling corners, where no cameras reached, then to the service hallway, where staff wouldn't pass for another 20 minutes. She'd timed it perfectly. From her black leather handbag, the Prada one I'd bought her for closing the Midland acquisition, she removed a small case, the kind you might mistake for a makeup compact. Inside were items Leo couldn't quite identify, a small glass vial no bigger than my thumb, and thin latex gloves folded with careful precision. Leo was behind the tall potted palm near the door. He'd been hiding there for 10 minutes, playing some game with himself about staying invisible while the adults rushed past, preparing for the party. When his mother entered, he'd frozen, knowing instinctively that moving would mean getting caught and sent upstairs. So he watched. Vivienne pulled on the gloves with 3 efficient snaps. She lifted the blue silk box, my birthday present, the one she'd texted about that morning, and set it on the edge of the table. Her fingers found a seam I would never have noticed. The bottom of the box slid open like a drawer, a false bottom. The gift itself had been engineered. Inside the hidden compartment, Leo saw what he described as a tiny stick like a toothpick, but shinier. Vivienne lifted it with the forceps, holding it up to the light. She whispered something he couldn't quite hear. Then she opened the small vial. The liquid inside caught the chandelier light. Later, forensics would tell me it was oleander. Vivienne dipped the sharp object once, held it steady for exactly 5 seconds. Leo counted the way children do when they're trying to understand things that frighten them. Then she positioned it beneath the red velvet lining inside the box itself, angling it so the tip would catch skin when someone reached in too quickly. 3 minutes, she whispered to herself, checking her watch. That's all I need. She reassembled everything with the precision of someone who'd practiced. The false bottom slid shut. The blue silk settled back into place. The ribbon hand-tied, the kind that cost $40 at the boutique downtown, lay across the top exactly as it had before. Perfect, she whispered so quietly, Leo almost didn't hear it. He'll never know until it's too late. She snapped off the gloves, tucked everything back into the leather case, and walked toward the door. Leo pressed himself against the wall behind the palm fronds, small enough that the shadows swallowed him whole. I wouldn't learn about this moment until the hospital, when Leo finally told us what he'd seen. He managed to slip out through the service entrance while Vivienne was checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. He walked as fast as he dared without running, his heart hammering so hard, he told me later he thought everyone could hear it. He turned the corner toward the grand staircase and nearly collided with his mother. She'd come from a different direction. Through the staff corridor, he realized the route that avoided the security cameras she'd mapped so carefully on Monday. She stopped, looked down at him. Her expression shifted through calculations he was too young to read, but old enough to feel. Then she smiled and knelt to his eye level. Sweetheart. She said, her voice honey and lavender perfume and everything Leo associated with safety. What were you doing in the gift room? He couldn't speak. She touched his cheek with fingers that had just handled poison. Were you peeking at Grandpa's presents? That's okay, I won't tell. She leaned closer. But I need you to do something for me. That thing you saw me doing. That's a special surprise for Grandpa. It's our secret. If you tell anyone at all, you'll ruin it and make him so sad on his birthday. You don't want that, do you? Leo shook his head. You love your grandpa, right? You want him to be happy. He nodded. Then this is how you show him. By keeping our secret. She straightened his collar with maternal tenderness. Can you do that for me, for Grandpa? I won't tell Mom, I promise. She kissed his forehead. Stood. Smoothed her dress. Good boy. Now go wash your hands and put on that navy tie. The one that makes you look grown up. An 8-year-old boy carrying a secret designed by a 32-year-old woman who knew exactly how to use love as a lock. Leo stood alone in that hallway, small hands clenched at his sides, watching his mother walk toward the grand staircase where party music was already beginning to drift through the house. She didn't look back. Her heels clicked against marble with the confident rhythm of someone who'd just completed a task and completed it well. And Leo, carrying the weight of a secret he'd been told was kindness, walked slowly toward the children's wing. 90 minutes later, Leo walked back down that same hallway, dressed in the navy tie, his face scrubbed clean, his secret still locked behind his teeth. At 8 p.m. sharp, I stood at the head of the long marble table surrounded by 90 people celebrating my birthday, crystal chandeliers throwing light across silverware and champagne flutes, and I had no idea the hidden trap sat 3 feet from my hand. The Sterling ballroom had never looked better. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Austin skyline, the city lights competing with the candles that lined the 20-foot table in precise intervals. White roses, Margaret's favorite, though she'd claim she chose them for me, filled crystal vases between the place settings. The scent of them mixed with roasted duck, and the particular smell of wealth-expensive perfume, aged wine, furniture, polish on wood that cost more per foot than most people's cars. Vivienne sat to my right in an emerald gown that probably cost what I used to make in a month back when I was turning wrenches on oil rigs. She looked radiant, presidential even. The kind of daughter you point to when other men brag about their children's accomplishments. My son Brent, 45 and vice president of operations at Sterling Energy, sat at the far end of the table with the careful, watchful posture of a man who'd been noticing things about his sister for 3 weeks and hadn't yet decided what to do about them. I caught his eye once during the salad course. He didn't smile. Dr. Vernon Stafford, 61, and my personal physician for 15 years occupied the chair to my left, as he always did at formal dinners, close enough to monitor the blood pressure that occasionally spiked when I got too excited about quarterly earnings or oil futures. He was telling me something about a new medication, but I wasn't really listening. I was watching Vivienne stand, champagne glass raised, waiting for the room to quiet. To the man who built sterling energy from a single oil rig into an empire, she said, her voice carrying that perfect blend of pride and affection that made me feel like maybe I'd done something right in raising her. And who taught us that vision and hard work can move mountains? To my father. To Russell, 90 voices echoed. I raised my own glass, feeling that warm surge of accomplishment that comes from being 72 years old and still mattering. Still being the man people toasted. Still having built something that would outlast me. 72 years old, 90 friends, my daughter beside me. This is what success looks like, I thought. I understand now that I was looking at a stage set. An execution chamber dressed up as a celebration, with the hidden trap positioned center stage, and the witnesses assembled in formal attire to watch me die without knowing what they were seeing. I would replay that toast in my mind 1,000 times later, searching for any crack in her performance, any hint of what was coming. I never found one. Vivienne had practiced this the way I'd practiced my first investor pitch, the way you practice anything you can't afford to get wrong. The children's table sat 12 feet to my left, positioned so the youngest guests could feel included, but not heard. 3 of my business partner's grandchildren sat there, and Leo. He hadn't touched his food, hadn't joined the other children when they'd tried to start some game with the napkins. His eyes were locked on something at the center of our table, and his small hands gripped the edge of his napkin like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to his chair. I noticed the way grandfathers notice things about grandchildren. But I misread it completely. Thought he was nervous about the crowd, or tired from the week, or coming down with something. Dr. Stafford leaned over. "You feeling all right? You look flushed." "Fine," I said. "Just warm in here with all these people." "Well, don't overdo it. You promised me you'd keep the speeches short." The main course came and went. Conversations rose and fell around me, like waves. Business deals and golf scores and someone's daughter getting into law school. Margaret sat at the other end of the table playing hostess with the same elegant efficiency she'd brought to 43 years of marriage. She caught my eye once and smiled, and I smiled back, thinking about how lucky I was. At 8:20, Vivienne stood again. She walked to the gift table, a smaller table positioned against the west wall, where 27 wrapped packages waited in neat rows. She returned carrying the blue silk box, the one she'd texted me about that morning. The one she'd positioned in the gift room at 7:14 while I was upstairs helping Leo with his tie. She set it in front of me with the kind of careful precision that makes you think someone's being thoughtful, rather than positioning a hidden trap. She adjusted the ribbon twice, making sure it faced me at the perfect angle. "Daddy," she said, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear, but soft enough to sound intimate. "Open this one first. I've been searching for 6 months to find something worthy of you." The room made that collective sound people make when they're witnessing a touching moment. Several of the women at the table put their hands to their chests. "You always were thoughtful, sweetheart," I said, pulling the box closer. The silk was smooth under my fingers. Cool. Expensive. I reached for the silver letter opener that sat beside my wineglass family heirloom. My grandfather's, the kind of detail Margaret insisted on for formal dinners. I touched the ribbon. From the children's table, I heard a chair scrape against the floor. Then Leo screamed, "Don't open that box, Grandpa, don't touch it." My 8-year-old grandson's voice cut through the crystal and candlelight like a knife through silk. 90 conversations stopped mid-sentence. 90 heads turned toward the children's table, where Leo stood small and shaking one arm extended toward me, as if he could physically stop me from touching the box. The silver letter opener was already in my hand. I stared at him, not understanding why he was standing, why his face was white, why his arm was shaking, why he was looking at me like I was about to step off a cliff. I didn't understand what I was seeing: a child interrupting his grandfather's birthday party, or a child trying to save his grandfather's life. I looked at my 8-year-old grandson across 12 feet of candle-lit marble. His small face twisted with terror, and my first thought was not, "What's wrong?" but "Why is he ruining my party?" That tells you everything you need to know about the man I was that night. The man who valued appearances over instinct, performance over truth. Leo didn't wait for me to respond. He didn't wait for permission or explanation or any of the things children usually wait for when adults are watching. He just ran, small legs pumping navy tie flying behind him. He wove between the chairs like he was being chased. 2 of the other children at his table started to stand confused, but their parents pulled them back down with gentle hands and confused whispers. Leo reached the head table and grabbed the blue silk box with both hands, pressing down on it like he was trying to hold a lid shut on something that might escape. "Grandpa, don't open it." His voice came out high and breathless. "Please don't touch it. There's something bad inside." Dr. Stafford pushed back slightly from the table, the instinctive movement of someone whose job is recognizing when things are medically wrong. But he was looking at Leo's face, not the box, checking for fever or delirium or some explanation that made sense in a physician's world. "Leo." I set down the letter opener, aware of 90 pairs of eyes on us, aware of the crystal chandeliers and the perfect table settings and the way my voice sounded too loud in the sudden silence. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother gave me a gift. I saw her." The words tumbled out of him like water breaking through a dam. "I saw Mom in the gift room. She put something in your box, something she didn't want anyone to see." A ripple went through the guests. Not speech yet, just that collective intake of breath that happens when a room full of people realizes they're witnessing something they didn't expect. "Sweetheart, you must have—" "I was hiding," he interrupted. And children never interrupted me. None of them. Not my own, not my grandchildren, not in 40 years of family dinners. Behind the plant by the door, she had gloves on and a little case with metal things, and she opened the bottom of the box. "It has a secret bottom, Grandpa," and she put something sharp inside and dipped it in a bottle, and I saw her, and she told me not to tell, but I can't let you open it. His hands were shaking on the silk. His whole body was shaking. I should have seen it then. Should have recognized what terror looks like on a child who's choosing his grandfather over his mother. Should have understood that 8-year-olds don't create detailed stories about secret compartments and medical forceps unless they've seen something that frightened them badly enough to break every rule they know. But I was thinking about 90 guests, about the partnership dinner I had scheduled for Monday with 3 of the men at this table, about what this scene looked like to people who expected elegance and control. That was my mistake, caring more about what 90 people thought of my family than what my grandson was trying to tell me. Vivienne stood. She rose from her chair slowly, like the movement hurt her. One hand pressed to her chest, fingers spread across the emerald silk of her gown. Her eyes were already wet. I would marvel at it later when I had time to think. How fast those tears came. How perfectly they gathered without spilling over, catching the chandelier light, like they'd been staged by a cinematographer. "Daddy!" Her voice broke on the word. "I am so sorry." She moved around the table toward Leo, her steps small and careful, a mother approaching a child who might bolt. "I didn't raise him well enough. He's ruined your beautiful evening. Vivienne, it's—" She turned to the room, not quite looking at anyone directly, just letting them see her face. The perfect picture of a mother humiliated by her child's behavior at a formal event. "Please forgive him," she said, her voice carrying just the right amount of tremor. "He's only 8. Such an active imagination at this age. I've been letting him watch too many detective shows, I think. He gets confused about what's real and what's television. Somewhere to my left, a woman murmured, "Children always pick the worst moments, don't they?" Another voicemail further down the table, "It's perfectly understandable." My grandson went through a phase like that. The sympathetic murmurs spread like a wave. I watched it happen, watched 90 intelligent adults, CEOs and physicians and attorneys and people who made million-dollar decisions based on evidence and analysis dismiss everything Leo had said because a beautiful woman in an expensive dress told them to. Vivienne reached for Leo's shoulder. He pulled away, pressing harder on the box. "Don't touch it," he whispered, but the fire was going out of his voice. He was hearing the same thing I was hearing, the room turning against him. "Please, Grandpa, don't open it." "Leo, that's enough." Vivienne's voice was gentle, but her fingers wrapped around his wrist with sudden firmness. "Come sit down. You're making Grandpa uncomfortable." "But Mom—" Now, she pulled him back from the table. Not hard enough to look cruel, but firm enough that he stumbled a step. Tears were running down his face now, real ones, the kind that come from being trapped between truth and disbelief. I didn't see Brent's face at that moment, but he would tell me later that he knew exactly what was happening the second Vivienne's tears appeared on cue. That he'd been watching her for 3 weeks, noting the small inconsistencies, the questions that didn't quite add up, waiting for her to make a move that confirmed what he suspected. Across the candlelit table, past the champagne flutes, and the sympathetic murmurs, and my daughter's perfect wounded mother performance, I caught my son's eyes. Brent was staring at his sister with an expression I'd never seen on his face before, not anger, not surprise, but recognition. Like he'd been waiting 3 weeks for her to make exactly this kind of move. Like watching a chess opponent finally commit to the strategy you'd predicted 6 turns ago. I didn't understand what that look meant until it was almost too late. What I did next is the moment I replay every night before I sleep, searching through 72 years of decisions for the one I would change if I could. Brent's look lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then Vivienne was pulling Leo away from the table, her hand firm on his shoulder, and the moment fractured into motion and noise and the social machinery of 90 people trying to pretend nothing uncomfortable had happened. Leo twisted out of his mother's grip. He didn't run this time. He walked. Straight toward me, his small face set in the kind of determination that reminded me uncomfortably of myself at board meetings, when someone questioned my judgment. He reached the blue silk box before anyone could stop him, and placed both hands flat on top of it. His palms barely covered half the surface, but he pressed down like he was trying to seal something dangerous inside. "Grandpa, please." His voice had gone quiet, which somehow made it worse than the screaming. "Please don't open it. I'm telling the truth. Please believe me." I looked at him. Really looked at him. Saw the trembling in his shoulders. The white knuckles. The way his breath came too fast, like he'd been running instead of walking those 12 feet. Something whispered at the back of my mind. Some instinct that had kept me alive in business for 40 years, that had taught me to recognize when a deal felt wrong, even if the numbers looked right. Then I looked past him, at Vivienne standing with one hand still pressed to her chest, tears catching the chandelier light. At the 90 faces around the table, some sympathetic, some embarrassed, all of them watching to see how I would handle this disruption. At Dr. Stafford's concerned expression, concerned about Leo, not about the box. At the untouched champagne and crystal flutes, the perfect white roses, the elegant evening I'd planned to celebrate 7 decades of building something that mattered, I calculated. Crying daughter plus watching guests plus defiant child equals loss of control at my own celebration. And I had built an empire on never losing control. What does a man choose when his pride and his grandson's truth stand on opposite sides of a birthday gift? I reached out and placed my hand over Leo's trembling fingers. "Leo, that's enough." My voice came out gentle but firm, the tone I'd used on my own children when they needed to learn that there were boundaries. "Step back. Let Grandpa handle this." "But Grandpa—" "Now." I felt his hands tense under mine. For a moment I thought he might fight, might dig in and refuse to move. Part of me hoped he would, because then I could be angry instead of uncomfortable. Could frame this as a discipline problem instead of what it actually was. But Leo didn't fight. He lifted his hands slowly, fingers sliding out from under my palm, with a gentleness that felt like resignation. He took one step back, then another. He didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't throw the kind of tantrum that would have given me an excuse to send him from the room and forget about this whole embarrassing scene. He just stood there 6 feet from the table watching me with eyes that were too old for his 8-year-old face. Vivienne moved to his side immediately, her hand on his shoulder, in what looked like comfort, but kept him from moving forward again. "I'm so sorry for this disruption," she said to the guests, her voice soft and apologetic. "Please, everyone, enjoy your dinner. This will just take a moment." The conversation started up again, quieter than before, but determined. The social contract reasserting itself. Nothing to see here. Just a child having a moment. How awkward for the poor mother. How gracious of Russell to handle it so calmly. I pulled the box toward me. The silk whispered across the tablecloth. Up close, I could see the detail in the wrapping hand-tied ribbon, the kind that cost extra because it required actual skill. The blue was the exact shade of the lake outside my study window at dawn. Vivienne had always noticed things like that. I picked up the silver letter opener, my grandfather's passed down through 3 generations of family dinners and formal occasions. The handle felt cool and familiar in my palm. Somewhere in my peripheral vision, I saw Brent lean forward slightly. Saw Dr. Stafford's hand move to his jacket pocket where he kept his emergency contact card for the nearest hospital. Saw Margaret at the far end of the table smiling at a guest's comment, completely unaware that anything was wrong. I positioned the letter opener under the ribbon. That's when I looked up one more time and caught Leo's eyes. He wasn't crying, wasn't pleading anymore. He just watched me with the patient, devastating acceptance of a child who had done everything he could and knew it wasn't enough. No anger, no resentment, just quiet patience. I will remember Leo's eyes in that moment for the rest of my life. No anger, no resentment, just the quiet patience of someone who tried to save you and failed. But I didn't stop. I told myself I was being rational, that children imagined things, that Vivienne's explanation made sense, that a successful man didn't let an 8-year-old story derail an elegant celebration in front of 90 witnesses. I told myself all of that. But the truth, which I would admit to myself later in a hospital room, when there was no one left to lie to, was simpler and uglier. I cared more about what 90 people thought of my authority than what my grandson's terror was trying to tell me. The silver letter opener slid under the velvet ribbon with a whisper of metal on silk. Leo stood 6 feet away, small hands empty at his sides, watching me cut through the last barrier between myself and whatever my daughter had hidden in that box. The ribbon fell open. I had perhaps 30 seconds before I understood exactly how much that choice had cost. I lifted the lid. Inside the blue silk box was the most beautiful antique fountain pen set I had ever seen, hand-carved ivory barrel, inlaid with gold platinum nib, nestled in burgundy velvet like a jewel. And 90 people applauded my daughter's perfect gift, while my grandson stood silent in the corner, waiting for what came next. The ballroom had gone quiet when I touched the lid, that collective held breath of people watching someone open an expensive present. Then the applause started, scattered at first, then building, as guests leaned forward to see what had warranted such drama. Oh, how exquisite! Vivienne stood slowly, one hand pressed to her chest, her eyes glistening with what looked like relief and joy and daughterly devotion, all perfectly blended. "I've been searching for 6 months," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound genuine. "Nothing was too good for Daddy's 72nd. More applause. Someone whistled low in appreciation. Dr. Stafford leaned over to examine the pen with a collector's interest. 19th century, if I'm not mistaken, he said. Italian. French, Vivienne answered. 1847. The craftsman only made 12 in this style. This is number 7. I lifted the pen from its velvet cradle, feeling the weight of it, the perfect balance that came from genuine artistry rather than modern manufacturing. The ivory was cool and smooth under my fingers. The gold inlay caught the chandelier light. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I said, meaning it. Truly beautiful. The antique was real, worth thousands, probably tens of thousands. She'd actually spent months searching for it, researching provenance, finding exactly the kind of gift that would appeal to a man who collected rare objects the way other men collected golf trophies. That was the genius of it, I would realize later. The hidden trap wasn't the gift. The hidden trap was hidden beneath the gift. The beauty was real enough to make you drop your guard completely. Around the table, conversations resumed. Crisis averted. The child had been wrong after all, just an overactive imagination, just like his mother said. Several guests leaned over to compliment Vivienne on her thoughtfulness, her dedication, her obvious love for her father. Leo stood near the children's table, not applauding, not smiling. His small hands were still clenched at his skew. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't read, not vindication or anger or relief, just waiting. Like someone watching a play unfold when they already knew how the last act ended. I set the pen down carefully and examined the box itself. Old habit. I'd been collecting antiques since I made my first real money in the 80s, boxes, pens, watches, anything with craftsmanship and history. And I'd learned early that the real value was sometimes in the container, not the contents. I have handled 1,000 antique boxes in my life, checked 1,000 maker's marks with my fingers. It was muscle memory instinct, the habit that nearly killed me. My right hand slid beneath the velvet lining, feeling for the maker's stamp that would be pressed into the wood at the base. My fingers traced the smooth interior, searching for the small indentation that would tell me who'd built this exquisite container. A sharp, cold sensation pierced my thumb pad. I pulled my hand back instinctively, the way you do when you touch something hot. Looked down at my thumb in confusion. A small red dot was welling up on the pad just below the nail. Tiny, barely visible. The kind of puncture you might get from a splinter or a pin. Something sharp, I said more to myself than anyone else. There's something under the velvet. Dr. Stafford turned toward me. I saw his eyes track from my face to my hand, saw the professional assessment, click into place, expression, change, color shift, pupil dilation, whatever he was trained to notice in his patients. He stood so quickly his chair scraped against the marble. "Russell, let me see your hand." His voice had changed. Not the friendly dinner companion anymore, but the physician who'd kept me alive through 3 rounds of chemotherapy. Sharp, focused, alert. "It's nothing," I started to say. "Just a..." "Grandpa." Leo was running. Not walking this time, not approaching carefully. Running flat out across the ballroom floor, his small legs pumping, his face white. I told you there was something bad inside." Dr. Stafford had my wrist before Leo reached us. His fingers found my pulse point, automatically counting, measuring. His other hand lifted my thumb toward the light. I saw him see it. The puncture. The small red dot. His eyes went to the box, then back to my thumb, then to the box again. "Don't touch that box," he said, his voice cutting through the renewed murmur of conversation like a scalpel through silk. "Nobody touches anything. Step away, now." The ballroom went quiet again, but this was a different quiet. Not anticipation, recognition. The kind of silence that happens when a room full of people realizes something is very wrong. Leo reached the table, his small hands grabbing my jacket sleeve. "What was in the bottle?" he asked, his voice high and frightened. "Mom had a bottle. She dipped the sharp thing in it." "What was in the bottle, Grandpa?" Dr. Stafford's fingers tightened on my wrist. "How deep?" he asked me, already pulling out his phone with his free hand. "How far did it penetrate?" That's when I understood Leo had been telling the truth. All of it. The hiding. The watching. The bottle and the forceps and the secret compartment. Every word my 8-year-old grandson had said while 90 adults dismissed him as an imaginative child having a moment. I looked across the table at Vivienne. She was still standing, one hand still pressed to her chest. But her expression had changed. The glistening eyes were gone. The trembling lip was gone. She was watching Dr. Stafford with an intensity that made my skin crawl, like she was calculating something, measuring outcomes, deciding what came next. The ballroom was silent now, except for Dr. Stafford's voice repeating his command, and Leo's ragged breathing beside me. 90 faces stared at the small red dot on my thumb, at the beautiful pen set, still resting in burgundy velvet, at the blue silk box that suddenly looked less like a gift and more like a hidden trap. Dr. Stafford had my wrist in his hand and was examining the puncture with the focused intensity of a man who knows he's looking at something very wrong. In the next 90 seconds, that small red dot would become the thing that saved my life. 30 seconds after the prick warmth spread from my thumb up my forearm like something alive moving under my skin, and I watched Dr. Stafford's face shift from concern to controlled alarm in the space of 2 heartbeats. "Can you feel that?" he asked, still holding my wrist. "Yes." The word came out steady, but I could feel the wrongness climbing. Not pain, exactly. Something else. Like my skin had become too tight for what was underneath it. The edges of my vision shimmered. The chandeliers above the ballroom table seemed to pulse with each beat of my heart. Dr. Stafford's jaw tightened. He looked past me toward the side entrance where I knew the cars were parked in the circular drive. Then back to my face, calculating something. "Private car," he said, not to me but to Brent, who'd moved to my other side without me noticing. "Now, we don't wait for the ambulance." "How bad?" Brent's voice was steady. The voice he used in board meetings when deals were falling apart. "Bad enough that 10 minutes matters." That's when I understood. Ambulance dispatch, travel time transfer to Gurney, all those careful protocols that saved lives by being thorough, would cost me the seconds I didn't have. The private Lincoln, sitting in the drive with my driver already at the wheel, was faster than any emergency response. The doctor was bypassing every rule in his profession's playbook because following procedure would kill me. "Daddy!" Vivienne's voice cut through the murmur that had filled the ballroom. She was moving toward me, her face a perfect mask of horror and concern, one hand reaching out. Brent stepped between us. He didn't say anything at first. Just positioned himself in her path, solid and immovable. When she tried to move around him, he shook his head once. Small movement, barely visible to anyone who wasn't watching. It stopped her cold. "Oh God," she said, her voice breaking. "What's happening? Is he—" "Step back," Brent said quietly. The guests were standing now, chairs scraping against marble conversations, dying, as 90 people realized this was no longer a birthday party, but something else entirely. A medical emergency, a family crisis, something they would tell their own families about later in hushed, dramatic tones. They parted for us like water. Dr. Stafford on one side, Brent on the other, supporting me between them, as we moved toward the side entrance. Someone held the door. Someone else said something about calling ahead to the hospital. The voices blurred together. Leo appeared at my elbow, small and fast, his face streaked with tears. "I'm sorry, Grandpa," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't stop you." I tried to answer, but Dr. Stafford was pulling me forward, and the moment passed. I had spent 72 years making decisions, building an empire from dirt and determination, and in 30 seconds, one small choice had brought me to this. The Lincoln's back door was already open. Dr. Stafford guided me down onto the leather seat, positioning me on my side like I was something fragile that might break. He climbed in behind me, his fingers immediately finding my pulse point again. "Austin Private Hospital," he told the driver, his voice cutting through the open partition. "Emergency entrance, fast but safe." The car moved before the door fully closed. I felt the acceleration, heard gravel spray under the tires as we took the curve of the drive, faster than my driver had ever taken it before. Outside the windows, Sterling residence fell away into darkness. Then the gate. Then the tree-lined street where I'd lived for 20 years. Austin blurred past in streaks of light, streetlights, traffic signals, headlights of other cars filled with people having normal Saturday nights. The warmth in my arm had become a dull ache. My mouth tasted like I'd been chewing on copper wire. Nausea rolled through me in waves that made my vision swim. Pulses elevated but steady, Dr. Stafford said quietly. Not to me. To himself, maybe. Documenting observations, the way physicians do when they're managing a crisis. Respiratory rate normal. Pupils responsive. Memories came unbidden. Vivienne's text this morning. Daddy, I've put your present in the gift room. The blue silk box centered on the marble table like a centerpiece. Leo's small hands pressed flat against the lid, trying to protect me from what was inside. The look in his eyes when I'd taken the box from his desperate grip. He had known. An 8-year-old child had known what his own mother was planning. You're going to be all right, Dr. Stafford said, and this time he was talking to me. The exposure was minimal. You only made contact through a small cut on your thumb. Very minimal exposure. That's the best thing that could have happened. The unspoken corollary hung in the air between us like smoke if the wound had been deeper. If you'd pressed harder when you reached under the velvet. If I hadn't been sitting right there when it happened. If. The highway stretched ahead, lit in orange sodium vapor. November darkness pressed against the windows. Inside the car, the leather seats smelled like furniture polish, and the pine air freshener my driver kept clipped to the vent. I closed my eyes and saw the ballroom. The chandeliers. The champagne and crystal flutes. My daughter in her emerald gown tears catching the light. You think you know your children until the day you lie in the back of a car, realizing one of them just tried to kill you. Almost there, Dr. Stafford said. 5 more minutes. I tried to answer but couldn't find the words. My throat felt thick. The nausea was getting worse, coming in shorter, sharper waves. Russell, stay with me. Keep your eyes open. Talk to me. My grandson was right, I whispered. Leo tried to stop me. He tried to tell me. The doctor's fingers tightened on my wrist. I know. Save your strength. The car pulled into the hospital emergency bay, red lights washing across Dr. Stafford's grim face. I closed my eyes and saw Leo standing empty-handed in the ballroom, watching me cut through the ribbon he'd tried so hard to protect me from. He had known. An 8-year-old child had known what his own mother was planning, had tried to stop it with everything he had. And I had chosen my pride over his truth. By the time I opened my eyes in the emergency room, my family would already be gathering some to help, and at least one to make sure I didn't survive the night. They hooked me up to machines within 3 minutes of arrival. In my left arm, blood pressure cuff cycling every 60 seconds, electrodes stuck to my chest, and for the first time in 40 years of running an empire, I had absolutely no control over what happened next. The emergency room smelled like antiseptic and floor wax. White acoustic ceiling tiles stretched above me in perfect rows. I counted them while strangers in scrubs moved around my gurney with choreographed efficiency. Mr. Harrington, can you tell me what you were exposed to? The nurse's voice was calm, professional. I don't know, I said. Something sharp, in a gift box, at my birthday party. She nodded and wrote something on her clipboard. Dr. Stafford stood beside my gurney talking to the ER physician, a woman in her 40s with steel gray hair pulled back tight. Puncture wound to the right thumb pad approximately 2 millimeters deep. Unknown substance. Patient reports warmth spreading from the site, mild nausea, numbness in the affected arm. Pulse elevated on arrival but stabilized at 86. Blood pressure holding at 140/90. The ER doctor leaned over me, shining a penlight in my eyes. Mr. Harrington, I'm Dr. Morrison. Any difficulty breathing? No. Chest pain? No. Vision changes. Some blurring earlier. Better now. She stepped back. Let's get blood for a comprehensive tox screen. CBC metabolic panel liver function. And prepare activated charcoal. I lay there while they drew vial after vial from my left arm. Red glass tubes lined up on a metal tray. My blood. My body. My life measured in milliliters and test results I wouldn't understand. A man who has controlled every aspect of building a fortune for 40 years, reduced to answering yes or no questions while strangers decided whether he lived or died. Dr. Stafford leaned close, his voice dropping below the beeping monitors. The exposure was minimal, he said quietly. Small puncture wound, thumb pad only. That's what's keeping you alive right now. I looked at him. Saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw was set. You're stable, he continued. But Russell, if that puncture had been deeper, or if I hadn't been sitting right next to you when it happened, we'd be having a very different conversation in intensive care. The words settled over me like a weight. Lying in that emergency room, hooked to machines, monitoring every function of my body, I finally understood what Leo had been trying to tell me with his small hands on that box. Not that there was danger, that there was death. Carefully planned, precisely measured. Hidden beneath beauty so perfect it made 90 people applaud. I closed my eyes. Russell, stay with me, don't sleep yet. I'm awake, I said. Just thinking. Think later. Right now I need you alert. The activated charcoal tasted like liquid concrete. I forced it down while a nurse held my head at an angle. Later, after the tox screen came back showing trace amounts of something the lab would need 12 more hours to identify after they'd moved me to a private room. With a guard posted outside at Brent's insistence, my son would tell me what happened in the VIP family waiting room while I was being stabilized. Hugh Whitaker, my head butler for 12 years and the most quietly competent man I'd ever employed, had brought Leo straight from the mansion to the hospital without waiting for instructions, understanding instinctively that the child needed to be with family. Leo sat in one of the padded chairs, still wearing the navy tie from the party, small and quiet. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying anymore. Just sitting very still the way children do when they're trying to be brave. Brent sat down beside him. Leo, he said gently, I need you to tell me exactly what you saw. Take your time. Every detail matters. And Leo told him, all of it. The gift room at 7:14 p.m. His mother entering alone. The small glass vial and hand tool from her purse. The false bottom of the blue silk box sliding open like a drawer. The thin, sharp object positioned beneath the velvet lining with surgical precision. The tip dipped once in the vial. The bottom closing again. The ribbon adjusted. She had gloves on, Leo added, the kind doctors wear, and she checked her watch twice. Brent listened without interrupting. His face didn't show surprise. It showed confirmation. The missing piece clicking into place after 3 weeks of watching his sister's behavior shift in ways he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. I didn't hear this conversation until the next morning, but Brent told me later it was the moment everything changed, from suspicion to certainty. When Leo finished, Brent pulled out his phone and dialed. Clayton, he said when the security chief answered. I need you to pull the security footage from tonight. All of it. The gift room especially. I'll explain when you get here. A pause. No, don't wait until morning. I need it tonight. Now. Another pause. Because my father is in the hospital with an unknown toxin in his bloodstream, and I need to know exactly what my sister did at 7:14 p.m. in the gift room. Clayton Townsend was already in his security office at the Sterling Mansion when Brent's call came through, and he had been reviewing footage since the moment the ambulance took me away. What he saw on those screens at 7:14 p.m. that Saturday evening would turn my daughter from family member into federal suspect before sunrise. But I didn't know that yet. I was still lying under fluorescent lights thinking about how close I'd come to dying, not understanding that the evidence to destroy my daughter was already being compiled in black and white. I learned later that while I lay in a hospital bed counting ceiling tiles and trying not to think about how close I'd come to dying, Clayton Townsend sat 15 miles away in the Sterling security office watching my daughter attempt to murder me in crystal clear high-definition footage, and by midnight, he had already made the call that would end her freedom forever. Clayton Townsend, 48 and my head of security for 11 years, had built the mansion's security protocols so carefully that even I didn't know about the hidden 4-camera system he'd installed 3 months earlier on completely separate storage triggered by suspicions about my daughter that he'd been too professionally cautious to voice without evidence. The mansion's main security system has 24 cameras, all documented, all known to Vivienne because she'd requested the security map 6 months prior for insurance purposes. But Clayton had noticed things. Vivienne asking about blind spots, the way she'd studied camera positions, casual questions about footage storage. So he'd installed 4 more cameras on a separate system, hidden as smoke detectors and wall outlets. One pointed directly at the gift room. He'd been pulling files since the ambulance left, already queuing up the 7:14 p.m. timestamp when Brent's call came through. Frame 7. From a different angle showed Leo's small face behind the potted palm, watching his mother, not understanding, but knowing something was wrong. Frame 8 came from November 21st. Side gate footage. 3:47 p.m. Vivienne receiving a padded envelope from a man in a delivery uniform who wasn't on any vendor list Clayton could trace. Clayton watched it all twice. Then he called Brent. "I have it," he said. "All of it. 7 angles, time-stamped. She's on camera for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Are you certain?" Brent's voice was tight. "I'm looking at her face right now." She knew exactly what she was doing. "Call the FBI," Brent said. "Do it now." While Clayton was making that call, I was lying in my hospital bed 15 miles away watching the clock tick past midnight into Sunday. Sleep didn't come. I replayed the past 2 years in a new sequence. The sequence of betrayal instead of trust. 2 years ago, Vivienne had first mentioned selling Sterling Energy. Casually, over Sunday dinner. "Just exploring options, Daddy. Understanding market valuations." 18 months ago, business dinners started with men I didn't know well. Investors from Dallas and Houston, always introduced by Vivienne, always framed as networking, expanding our capital base. Last week, she'd entered my study looking for old photographs of her grandmother. But the family photos are in the library, not the study where I keep my signature authentication system. Leo's return on Monday wasn't about Thanksgiving bonding. It was about mapping security cameras. That's what betrayal does. It makes you review every memory and wonder which moments were real and which were performance. 40 years of building an empire from a single oil rig. 12-hour days in 100-degree heat. Calculated risks. Creating something worth enough that my daughter thought it was worth killing me to possess. And she'd smiled across the dinner table for 2 years while planning it. Called me Daddy. Kissed my cheek. How did I not see it? I whispered to the empty room. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. No answer. Down the hall in the small family waiting room, Leo sat awake at 2 a.m. in a chair too big for him. The stuffed rabbit from home was tucked under his arm, brown velvet ears worn soft from years of being held. Hugh Whitaker sat beside him with a cup of cooling coffee, keeping watch. Leo had been quiet for an hour. Then he broke the silence. "I should have told Grandpa sooner," he said, his voice very small. "Before the party. Maybe he would have believed me then." Hugh looked at the 8-year-old carrying guilt that belonged to a 32-year-old woman. "You said it in time, Leo," he said gently. "Your grandfather is alive because you were brave enough to break your promise to your mother. That's what matters." "I didn't want to ruin the surprise," Leo whispered. "She said I'd make him sad." "You did everything an 8-year-old could do. You screamed in a room full of people who didn't want to listen. You tried to take that box from his hands. You were braver than most adults would have been." Leo held on to those words, wanting to believe them, not quite convinced. Outside the hospital windows, Austin glowed against the darkness like a circuit board. All those lives continuing, while mine had fractured into before and after. By 4 a.m., 3 separate threads were pulling tight. Clayton had compiled 7 camera angles and was drafting his report for federal investigators. The footage burned to 3 separate drives, chain of custody documented with paranoid precision. I had assembled 2 years of my daughter's deception into a timeline that made terrible sense, every dinner and smile and question now reframed as reconnaissance. And Leo had finally fallen asleep in Hugh's arms, still holding his rabbit, still carrying the weight of being the only one who'd tried to save me. None of us knew that in 3 hours, when the sun came up, everything would accelerate beyond any of our control. The FBI would want to see the footage before breakfast. 3 hours after dawn, Clayton walked into my hospital room carrying a brown leather portfolio, and the first words out of his mouth were not, "How are you feeling?" but, "I have the evidence that will put your daughter in federal prison for the rest of her life." Brent stood behind him in the doorway, his face showing the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept. Neither had I. The machines had beeped their steady rhythm all night while I'd counted ceiling tiles and reconstructed 2 years of smiles that had been lies. Clayton moved to the rolling table beside my bed and set the portfolio down with careful precision. The leather was worn at the corners, the kind of case that holds documents you can't afford to lose. "Hidden camera system," he said, opening the clasp. 4 angles she didn't know existed, time-stamped to the second. This is photo sequence 1 through 6, 7:14 to 7:17 p.m. He laid out 6 photographs like cards in a hand of poker. Photo 1, Vivienne, entering the gift room at 7:14:23 p.m. Black clutch under her arm. Face calm, almost serene. The expression of someone completing a planned task. Photo 2, her hands holding a small glass vial and surgical forceps. The objects removed from the clutch, positioned against the white of her dress, like surgical instruments on a sterile field. Photo 3. The false bottom of the blue silk box slid open. Her hands positioning something beneath the red velvet lining. And there, in the background, barely visible behind the potted palm, Leo's small face watching. 8 years old, curious, frightened, knowing something was wrong. Photo 4. The sharp object being placed with precision. The angle of Clayton's camera caught the glint of metal, the careful positioning. Photo 5. The tip being dipped once in the vial, 5 seconds of contact. Measured, practiced. Photo 6, bottom closed, velvet smoothed, ribbon adjusted to face my seat at the head table with perfect alignment. I looked at each photograph for a long minute. The hospital room was silent, except for the beeping monitors and the distant sound of a cart being wheeled down the hallway. Brent's hand settled on my shoulder. Heavy, warm, the weight of it anchoring me to something solid when everything else had turned to water. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I should have said something 3 weeks ago when I first suspected." I didn't look up from the photographs. "How long have you had these cameras, Clayton?" 3 months, since August. When Vivienne had started asking detailed questions about the estate planning. When she'd requested copies of the corporate trust documents for her personal files. "You suspected her that long ago." "Not suspected," Clayton said carefully. "Noticed. Small things. Questions that didn't quite fit. I installed the hidden system as insurance, hoping I was wrong. There is a particular kind of silence that comes when you are looking at photographic proof that your own daughter tried to murder you. Not the silence of disbelief, but the silence of a truth so heavy it crushes all the words out of the room. I reached for photo 3 again. Traced my finger along the edge where Leo's face appeared behind the palm fronds. "He saw everything," I said. "Yes," Clayton confirmed. Brent's hand tightened on my shoulder. "He tried to tell you, Dad. He tried to tell all of us. And I had chosen my pride over his truth. Chosen 90 people's opinions over my grandson's terror. Chosen the appearance of control over the reality of danger." Clayton slid one more photograph across the rolling table. "Photo 7, he said. November 21st, 3:47 p.m., 2 days before the party. This one showed the side service gate at Sterling Mansion. Autumn sunlight. Vivienne in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, the kind of outfit she wore on weekends when she wasn't performing executive. She was handing a small manila envelope to a man in a generic delivery uniform. Blue shirt, khaki pants, baseball cap pulled low. Except, the uniform was wrong. The company logo didn't match any vendor in the mansion's approved service list. And his posture, the way he stood, the careful positioning of his body, was too professional for a simple courier. "He's not on any authorized roster," Clayton said. "No vendor I can trace. No legitimate delivery service. We're running facial recognition through law enforcement databases. FBI will want to know who he is and what was in that envelope." But I barely heard him. I had gone back to photo 3, the one with Vivienne's hands on the false bottom of the box, her face showing that calm, practiced precision, and Leo, small, half-hidden, watching. I picked up photo 3 and held it close to my face, studying my grandson's expression. Curiosity mixed with fear. A child who knew something was wrong but didn't have the words or power to stop it alone. The child who would scream 12 hours later in front of 90 people. The child no one believed. The child I had dismissed with gentle words about letting Grandpa handle this. "How many copies?" I asked. Clayton understood the question immediately. 3 full sets. One with the FBI liaison, one in my personal safe, one here. Digital files on encrypted backup with timestamp verification. Chain of custody documented from the moment of capture. And the accomplice, the man in photo 7, still running identification. But the envelope exchange is clear. Physical evidence of conspiracy. Premeditation. Contact with an outside party for purposes unknown. Brent moved around the bed to stand where I could see his face without turning. "What do you want to do, Dad?" I set the photos down in a neat stack. All 7 of them. Evidence of a conspiracy that had been unfolding around me for months while I'd been too proud and too blind to see it. Clayton and Brent waited for me to speak, to rage, to break down, to demand we call lawyers or FBI or both. Instead, I looked at my son and said 5 words that would define everything that came next. Where is my daughter now? The answer to that question would determine whether this became a family tragedy or a federal case. The photographs showed me how my daughter tried to kill me, glass vial, surgical forceps, poisoned pin beneath red velvet. But the documents Brent opened on his laptop showed me what she planned to do after I was dead. And that was somehow worse. "She's at her apartment," Brent said, answering my question. "Unaware that we have the footage. Unaware that you're alive and know everything." He set his laptop on the rolling table beside Clayton's photographs and opened a folder marked with red flags. "I found the first irregularity 3 weeks ago," he said quietly. "Trust document alterations, interim chairmanship clause modifications, asset transfer provisions, all changed in the past 6 months." His fingers moved across the keyboard, pulling up documents I'd signed or thought I'd signed. Corporate trust amendments, emergency board protocols, liquidation authorizations. "I kept hoping I was wrong," Brent continued. "That there was some legitimate explanation. That my own sister wasn't—" He stopped, swallowed. "I should have told you then." He tapped a key and the speaker on his laptop crackled to life. "Russell." Gerald Morrison's voice filled the hospital room. Sterling Energy's corporate counsel for 20 years, and the man who'd reviewed every major contract I'd ever signed, delivering the legal analysis over speakerphone, with the careful precision of someone who understood he was documenting a federal crime. "Gerald," I said, "Brent's showing me the documents. Then you're seeing what I've been reviewing since midnight," Gerald said. "Russell, these alterations bypass the 2-factor authentication protocol required by your family insurance fund. Every single one. Legally void. But the pattern is clear: temporary control provision, emergency board authority, asset liquidation clause." "Walk me through it," I said. Gerald's voice was steady, methodical. If you had been declared medically incapacitated Saturday night, these documents, had they been valid, would have allowed Vivienne to call an emergency board meeting within 72 hours. She'd assumed temporary control as acting CEO. The liquidation clause gives her authority to authorize the sale of company assets to pre-approved buyers during a declared emergency. Pre-approved buyers, I repeated. Brent pulled up another file. 3 investors, all from Dallas and Houston, all introduced to you by Vivienne over the past 18 months. All of them left Austin Friday afternoon 12 hours before your party and established alibis in other cities. The plan crystallized in front of me like ice forming on glass. This wasn't just murder. This was a complete corporate takeover. The assassination was step 1. The forged documents were step 2. The emergency board meeting would have been step 3. And by the time anyone questioned the authentication protocols, Sterling Energy would have been sold, and the buyers would have been long gone with legally binding contracts. That's what children do when they love you. They hope they're wrong about the person trying to hurt you. They give second chances and third chances. They carry silence like stones in their pockets. 3 weeks, I said, looking at Brent. You've been carrying this alone. His jaw tightened. I kept thinking there had to be another explanation. That maybe she was just being overly prepared for succession planning. That I was being paranoid about my own sister. But you weren't paranoid. No, he said quietly. I wasn't. Gerald's voice cut back in. Russell, the FBI will need these files. The intent is clear even if the execution failed. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Attempted murder. Corporate malfeasance. This goes far beyond a family matter. Before I tell you what passed between my son and me in that hallway. Are you still with me? Comment A. If Brent should have spoken up weeks ago, or B, if you understand his silence. Add one short reason, a note. The next part includes some recreated details for emotional impact, but the lesson is real. Brent helped me into a wheelchair without asking if I wanted one. Just positioned it beside the bed and waited while I swung my legs over the edge, my body protesting every movement. The hospital hallway was quiet. Sunday morning. Most of the staff at shift change. He pushed me to a window overlooking Austin's skyline buildings, catching the morning sun, traffic still light. The city waking up slow and unaware that one of its founding families was tearing itself apart 15 floors above the street. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Brent spoke, his voice thick with something he'd been carrying for weeks. I saw the signs, Dad. The dinners with strangers. Her questions about the trust. Office visits when you weren't there. I should have told you. But she's my sister, and I didn't want to be the person who broke this family apart. I turned the wheelchair to face him directly. You didn't break anything, I said. This family was broken from the inside by her choices, not by your silence. You tried to protect us both. That's not a failure. That's love. His shoulders dropped for the first time in what must have been weeks. My 45-year-old son, vice president of the company I'd built, the child, who'd noticed what I'd missed, and blamed himself for my near death, finally exhaled the weight he'd been carrying. If you have ever blamed yourself for not seeing something you should have seen, for not saying something you should have said, you will understand what passed between my son and me in that hospital hallway overlooking Austin. What do we do now? He asked, his voice breaking slightly. I looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the exhaustion, the guilt, the loyalty that had kept him silent even when silence hurt. Help me out of this wheelchair, Brent. I'm done lying in a hospital bed while my daughter thinks she's gotten away with this. The look on his face told me he'd been waiting to hear exactly those words. By noon, I would be standing in my own mansion again, and Vivienne would learn that her father had survived more than just her poison. At 11 a.m. Sunday morning, while I was arguing with Dr. Stafford about discharging myself against medical advice, FBI agents 15 miles away were arresting the man who'd supplied my daughter with poison and discovering that my name was only the first of 3 on his list. I wouldn't learn the details until Clayton arrived 30 minutes later, but the arrest itself happened like clockwork. Clayton had passed the man's photo and identity to his FBI contacts overnight. By dawn, they'd sealed the private aviation terminal on Austin's outskirts, the kind of airstrip where people with money and secrets keep their chartered jets. Cedric Keller, the 50-year-old contract specialist who'd appeared in Photo 7, handing my daughter an envelope at the mansion's side gate, was a professional in the business of making people disappear. And he'd been prepared to make 3 members of my family disappear over the next 18 months. He arrived at the terminal at 10:45 a.m. Sunday morning. Light traffic, no witnesses. A chartered Gulfstream waiting on the tarmac with a flight plan filed for Mexico City. He carried a single leather overnight bag and walked with the confident posture of someone who'd done this before. Someone who knew how to cross borders quietly. Someone who understood that the best time to leave the country was when everyone else was still sleeping off their Saturday night. What he didn't know was that every exit was covered. FBI agents stopped him at the boarding gate. Professional, efficient, no drama. He didn't run, didn't resist, just stood there with that overnight bag in his hand and waited for them to cuff him. The search revealed 2 passports bearing different names but the same face. $18,000 in mixed currency, American, Mexican, Canadian, and a small leather case, the kind that holds medical instruments or jewelry tucked into the false bottom of the overnight bag. Inside the case, 3 glass vials, sealed, identical to the one Vivienne had used on my gift. 3 vials, the FBI agent said into his radio, his voice flat with professional control. Sealed. Same chemical signature as the one from last night. He was prepared for 3 more hits. Keller said only 4 words during the entire arrest. I want my lawyer. Professional to the end. Understanding he'd been caught with evidence that would put him away on multiple federal charges. They unlocked his encrypted phone at the FBI field office. It took their tech team 40 minutes and a federal warrant. Clayton received the FBI call at 11:15 a.m. My name was first. Method organic toxin trace amounts minimal detection risk. 3 sterling family members standing between Vivienne and everything I'd built. 3 carefully timed events that would have left her the sole surviving heir. There is something uniquely terrifying about learning that your child has been calmly planning to murder not just you, but everyone who stands between her and your money. I looked at Clayton. Where is my daughter right now? His answer was chilling in its simplicity. Waiting for the phone call. Waiting for news that the poison had worked. Waiting for confirmation that her 72-year-old father had died quietly in his sleep at the hospital, just another elderly man whose heart couldn't handle the stress of a medical emergency. She'd been sitting there for 7 hours, coffee cup in hand, phone beside her, checking it every few minutes. Waiting, not pacing, not anxious. Just patient, calm. The way you wait when you're confident the outcome is inevitable. She doesn't know, I said. No, Clayton confirmed. She doesn't know Keller's in custody, doesn't know about the photographs, doesn't know we found the forged documents, doesn't know you're alive and planning to walk out of this hospital. Brent stood up and moved to the window looking out at Austin's Sunday morning skyline. What do we do? He asked. I looked at Clayton and Brent, then at the hospital room that had kept me alive through the night. My daughter was 15 miles away drinking coffee in her downtown apartment, checking her phone every few minutes, waiting for confirmation that the poison had worked and her 72-year-old father had died quietly in his sleep. She didn't know that Keller was in FBI custody. She didn't know about the photographs. She didn't know that I knew everything, and I intended to keep it that way until I was standing in front of her. Clayton's surveillance report. That Sunday morning was chilling in its patience. My daughter sat in the Sterling residence living room for 3 hours, without calling the hospital once, without checking on my condition, just waiting for the phone to ring with confirmation that I was dead. He'd had his security team monitoring her from the moment she returned to the family mansion at 4 a.m. Not to the downtown apartment where she'd been earlier. To our home. To the house where I'd raised her. A worried daughter would be calling the hospital every hour, texting her brother for updates, pacing the floor with anxiety, driving to the hospital to be by her father's bedside. Vivienne did none of these things. The posture of someone waiting for expected news, not someone fearing the worst. Clayton showed me this footage later. Time-stamped. Crystal clear. She didn't call the hospital, he said. Not once. That's not what a worried daughter does. No, it wasn't. She was waiting for you to die, not hoping you'd survive. The surveillance footage makes that clear. At 11:47 a.m., her phone vibrated with an incoming message. For the first time in 18 hours, her expression shifted from patient waiting to something else. Confusion, maybe. Or the first whisper of alarm that the call she'd been expecting still hadn't come. She checked her encrypted messages, checked again, sent something, waited. When her phone buzzed at 11:47, Clayton reported her face changed, like she was realizing something had gone wrong. But she didn't call the hospital, didn't call Brent, didn't do anything that would look like concern, just sat there, waiting. What does a father feel when he learns his daughter spent Sunday morning not praying for his survival, but waiting for confirmation of his death? I can tell you it's not anger. Not yet. It's something colder, something that settles in your chest like ice and doesn't melt. At 12:30 p.m., I told Dr. Stafford I was leaving. He tried the argument I expected. 24 more hours of observation. Stable vitals but potential complications. Professional recommendation to stay. I'll sign whatever liability release you need, I said. But I'm going to my house to confront my daughter before the FBI takes that choice away from me. He looked at me for a long moment, understanding that some things matter more than medical protocols. 2 hours maximum, he said finally. Someone with you at all times. Use a cane. Any symptoms, chest pain, numbness, nausea, you come back immediately. Agreed. Brent spoke before I could ask. I'll go with him. I called Clayton from the hospital room phone. Report everything to the FBI, I said. Photos, documents, Keller's arrest, the list. All of it. But I want to be at the residence before they arrive. Before 2 p.m. Understood, Clayton said. I'll coordinate the timing. Before I left, I had one more thing to do. I wheeled myself down the hallway to the family waiting room where Leo sat with Hugh. The 8-year-old was still wearing the same clothes from the party. Navy tie loosened, small and tired. He looked up when I came in. Grandpa, are you okay? I told him the truth. I'll be all right. The doctor said so. He nodded. Then he said what he'd been holding since Saturday night. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. Before the party. Maybe you would have believed me then. I looked at this child who'd tried to save 3 lives and was blaming himself for my pride. No, I said. You said it at the right time. You screamed in front of 90 people. You tried to take that box from my hands. I didn't listen. That's my fault, not yours. His eyes were red, but he wasn't crying. Just looking at me with that serious expression he'd been wearing since the party. Does it hurt? He asked. A little, I said. But I'm fine. He nodded with the grave acceptance of someone far older than 8, understanding that sometimes adults make mistakes and children save them anyway. I reached out, and he came to me. Let me pull him into a hug that was careful of the IV port still in my arm but fierce enough to mean something. Thank you, I whispered into his hair, for being braver than all of us. He held on to me for a moment, then stepped back and straightened his tie with small, precise movements. Hugh says we can go home when you're better. Soon, I promised. Very soon. Hugh stood and offered his hand. I shook it. Take care of him, I said. Always, sir. I left the hospital at 1:15 p.m. Sunday afternoon, less than 17 hours, so hours after my daughter's poison entered my bloodstream, and I knew with absolute certainty that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Dr. Stafford had given me a cane hospital-issue aluminum adjustable height, the kind they give to people recovering from surgery. Brent carried the discharge papers and a bag of medications I was supposed to take. The parking lot was bright with November sunshine, cold air that smelled like car exhaust and dried leaves. Normal Sunday afternoon sounds. Families leaving after visiting hours. Car doors closing. Engines starting. My daughter had tried to kill me 36 hours ago, and the world had just kept turning. Brent helped me into the passenger seat of his car, placed the cane carefully beside me, closed the door with gentle precision. He got behind the wheel and started the engine without asking if I was ready. We both knew I wasn't. We both knew I was going anyway. We pulled out of the hospital parking lot into Austin's Sunday afternoon traffic. 15 miles away, my daughter was still sitting in that same leather chair, still checking her phone, still waiting for news that would never come. She didn't know I was alive. She didn't know I was coming home. And I intended to keep that tactical advantage for exactly as long as it took me to look her in the eyes and ask her why. The iron gates of Sterling residence swung open with a groan I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I had. And 43 years of assuming tomorrow would arrive had taught me not to listen. The car rolled up the familiar driveway, gravel crunching beneath tires that had carried me home from the hospital instead of the morgue. 15 minutes from discharge to homecoming. 15 minutes to cross from one life into another. Brent parked in the circular drive and came around to help me out. I'd protested at first, but the cane in my right hand and the exhaustion in my bones told me this wasn't the hill to die on metaphorically or otherwise. The front doors opened before we reached them. There they stood, Hugh Whitaker, his weathered face carefully neutral, and behind him the entire household staff lined up in the entrance hall like soldiers at attention. No one spoke. No one rushed forward. They simply stood there, and in that silence I understood what words would have cheapened, that they'd known, that they'd stayed, that they were here. Hugh gave me a single nod, the kind that contains entire conversations, if you know the language, and I nodded back because my throat had closed around anything I might have said. "Sir," he said quietly. I took a step forward, then another, the cane clicking against marble floors I'd walked across 10,000 times without really feeling them. Each footfall echoed in the cavernous space, and I was aware, painfully, viscerally aware, that these might be some of my last steps through this house as a free man. One of the younger housekeepers, a woman named Sarah, who'd started 6 months ago, had tears streaming down her face. Hugh put a gentle hand on her shoulder without looking away from me. I wanted to tell them it was all right, that I'd be fine, but we all knew I'd be lying, and they deserved better than that. "Easy, Dad," Brent said beside me. "No rush." "Thank you, Hugh," I managed. "All of you." So I just kept walking, Brent, a solid presence beside me, each step taking me deeper into a home that suddenly felt like a museum of my own life. Every painting, every piece of furniture, an artifact of the man I'd been before November 22nd. I'd made it exactly halfway to the study when the doorbell rang. Not the polite chime of social callers, the insistent double press of official business. Hugh moved to answer it, but I waved him off. I knew who it was. Had been expecting them since Clayton's text at 1 p.m. FBI ready. Evidence package complete. Chain of custody documented. They're coming to you. I opened the door myself. 2 FBI agents stood on the doorstep. A man and a woman, both wearing the kind of neutral expressions that came from delivering bad news professionally and often. Behind them, 2 local police officers flanked a third man carrying evidence containers, the kind with tamper-evident seals and documentation requirements. "Mr. Harrington," the woman said, "we have everything we need to proceed." I stepped back and gestured them inside. Brent moved to my shoulder like he was afraid I might collapse, which was fair because I wasn't entirely sure I wouldn't. We moved to my office, the space where I'd built Sterling Holdings from a regional construction firm into something that employed 200 people and generated revenue that kept Austin families fed. Agent Reynolds set a briefcase on my desk with careful precision and clicked it open. Documents organized with the kind of thoroughness that either saves your life or ends it. Clayton stepped forward, his attorney mode fully engaged, and began reviewing the evidence logs with Agent Reynolds while the other agent badge read. Chen took notes on everything. The police officers remained by the door, witnessing but not participating. Their presence a reminder that this was both a federal investigation and a local crime. "The chain of custody is perfect," Clayton said. "Every document, every transfer, every witness statement, it's all here." Agent Reynolds walked me through it. The falsified trust documents Hugh had discovered. The asset transfer attempts Clayton had flagged. The medication records Brent had secured from the hospital. Each piece of evidence had been photographed, documented, and logged with timestamps and handler signatures. The chain of custody so pristine it could have been used as a training example. "Mr. Harrington," Agent Reynolds said, her voice careful. "We need to ask, do you want to be present when we bring her in, or would you prefer to?" I cut her off before she could finish. "I'll be there. Not in the room, but in the building. I need to see this through." Brent's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Dad, are you sure you just got out of the hospital?" "I'm sure," I said. "This ends today." Clayton's eyes met mine with a look that said he'd expected exactly that answer and had already planned for it. Agent Reynolds nodded once, efficiently. She began gathering the evidence back into the briefcase, while Agent Chen continued documenting every movement, every handoff, every piece of the case they were building against the woman I'd loved for 43 years. The woman who'd sat in this very office 3 weeks ago, asking about quarterly projections and succession planning. Her voice warm with daughterly concern, her eyes already calculating how long I had left to live. Agent Reynolds closed the briefcase with a decisive click and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "We'll move at 3 p.m., she said. "She's at the Sterling Holdings office right now meeting with your CFO about the Q4 projections. She has no idea we're coming." Those 90 minutes collapsed into 15. Vivienne set down her coffee cup with exaggerated care when the unmarked sedans pulled into the driveway. The kind of care that comes from knowing exactly what those cars mean. She'd come to the house instead of staying at the office. A choice that would have seemed strange yesterday. Today, it made perfect sense. She'd been waiting here, waiting for news about me. The FBI agents entered through the front door that Hugh opened without being asked. Agent Reynolds first, then Agent Chen, both moving with the measured pace of people who'd done this before and knew there was no rush. Vivienne stood as they entered the living room. Her expression cycled through the stages I'd seen 1,000 times in business negotiations: feigned surprise, rapid calculation, genuine fear. Then she saw me. I stood in the study doorway, cane in my right hand, Brent beside me, still alive, still standing, still here. Father and daughter locked eyes across 15 feet of imported marble and Persian rugs, and 43 years of what I'd thought was family. I didn't enter the living room, just watched as the truth settled between us like sediment in water. "Ms. Harrington," Agent Reynolds said, her voice professionally neutral. "We need to ask you some questions about communications with Cedric Keller regarding trust documents." Vivienne's eyes never left mine. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I haven't done anything wrong." The words came out smooth, practiced. The voice of someone who'd prepared for this moment and had her story ready. But her hands gave her away. Small movements, fingers touching her coffee cup. Then her phone. Then the arm of the chair. Looking for something to anchor to. "Don't," I said from the doorway. One word. Quiet. But it cut through the room like a blade. She stopped. Her hands went still. "How do you look at your own child and see a stranger who wanted you dead?" I can tell you it's not dramatic. It's not a moment of rage or revelation. It's just cold recognition. Like looking at a photograph and realizing the person you thought you knew was someone else entirely. Agent Chen was taking notes. Agent Reynolds was explaining rights and procedures. But Vivienne was only looking at me. "You knew," she said finally. Not a question, a statement. "Yes." "How long?" I didn't answer. Just turned and walked back into the study. Let Brent help me into the leather chair behind my desk. The chair where I'd built Sterling Holdings. where I'd signed the documents that would save it. Brent closed the study door. Clayton was already there, another folder open on the desk. The trust was ironclad, Clayton continued. Required your signature, Brent's signature, and two-factor authentication from the family insurance fund. They never had a chance, I said quietly. March. 8 months of watching them think they were winning. Brent was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You protected the company, he said, but you didn't protect yourself. I didn't think she'd actually try to kill me, I admitted. I thought this was about money and control, corporate maneuvering. I didn't understand it was about elimination. Clayton pulled a second folder from his briefcase, this one marked with yesterday's date. He slid the papers across the desk. The FBI already had the supplier's log from a previous investigation into Keller, a botanical supply company in New Mexico. They sold concentrated oleander extract to a representative of the LLC. The signature on the purchase order matches Vivienne's digital footprint. The delivery address matches a P.O. box she controlled in August, under a business name that doesn't exist. I looked at the documents, saw my daughter's trail, saw the date, saw the careful planning that had gone into killing me. 3 weeks before the party, I said. Yes, Clayton confirmed. She purchased the poison through Keller 3 weeks in advance, planted it in the gift box, and waited for you to die. Outside the study door, I could hear Agent Reynolds reading Vivienne her rights. Professional. Methodical. The sound of a life ending one carefully documented procedure at a time. But the hardest moment came later, when they led my daughter through the main hall. Vivienne's footsteps echoed down the corridor. Not the confident click of designer heels I'd heard 1,000 times, but the shuffle of someone wearing FBI-issued shoes. I stood in the archway between the study and the hall, watching. Brent beside me. Silent. The agents were professional. Not rough, not cruel, just efficient. One hand on her elbow, the other carrying the evidence case. She stopped when she saw me. Agent Reynolds didn't prevent it, just paused, giving us the moment even though protocol probably said to keep moving. Vivienne looked at me across 10 feet of marble floor. No tears this time. No performance. Just my daughter looking at her father. Daddy, she said, one word. Quiet. The same word she'd used when she was 3 and fell off her bicycle. When she was 16 and needed help with calculus. When she was 25 and called to say she'd gotten the vice president position. The same word. Different person. I took a step forward. The cane clicked against the floor. I love you, my daughter, I said. I will always love you, but I cannot protect you from what you have chosen to do. Her eyes closed for the second. When they opened again, something had changed. Acceptance, maybe. Or just exhaustion. Time to go, Ms. Harrington, Agent Reynolds said quietly. Vivienne nodded, turned, walked toward the front door without looking back. I watched until the sedan pulled out of the driveway. Watched until the gates closed. Watched until there was nothing left to see but afternoon sunlight on empty gravel. Brent's hand was on my shoulder again. Come sit down, Dad. We moved back to the office. Clayton was still there, still working, still documenting everything with the methodical precision that had kept Sterling Holdings safe when my own family was trying to destroy it. Agent Reynolds stayed behind after her partner left to provide the final update. The 3 investors connected to Greystone Capital Partners were officially detained at JFK O'Hare and LAX, she said, shutting her tablet. Their liquidation strategy relied entirely on Vivienne having immediate transfer authority. Because your security team froze the core assets back in March, the buyers were caught holding unsigned contracts and a paper trail that completely exposes their fraud. The company was legally untouched from the very beginning. I nodded, too tired to feel vindicated. Agent Reynolds left. Clayton left. Even Brent eventually left, though he made me promise to call if I needed anything. And then I was alone in the house for the first time since Saturday morning. I sat in my private study, The room where I'd signed my first major contract, where I'd planned every expansion, where I'd celebrated every success. The window looked out over the lake, the same view I'd had before the party, 48 hours ago. Less than 2 full days. I called Clayton on his cell. "Remove the old signature system," I said when he answered. "Install new biometric authentication tomorrow morning. Fingerprint and retinal scan. No one accesses company assets when I'm not physically present." "Already ordered," he said. "The new system requires both. It'll be operational by 9 a.m. "Good. Russell," he said, using my first name for maybe the 3rd time in 11 years. "Get some rest. You just got out of the hospital." "I will," but I didn't. I sat in that chair and looked at the lake and thought about everything that had happened since Saturday morning. Today, I lost the person I trusted most. I survived because of the person I didn't trust. Leo. 8 years old. Screaming in front of 90 people who didn't want to listen. Trying to take a box from my hands while I gently but inexorably pulled it away from him. He'd saved 3 lives that night. Mine, Brent's, my brother's, and I dismissed him because I cared more about what 90 people thought than what my grandson's terror was trying to tell me. "Less than 48 hours, I said to the empty room. That's all it took to lose everything and learn what actually mattered. I opened the desk drawer. The same drawer where Clayton had found Vivienne's forged trust documents. Pulled out a blank sheet of paper. My hand shook slightly. Hospital weakness, Dr. Stafford had called it. But the words came clearly enough. At the top, what comes next? Below it, a single line, Lesson 1, trust is earned in years and lost in seconds. The corporate lawyer slid a stack of documents across the conference table with the careful neutrality of someone who'd read every word of the criminal complaint and knew better than to offer sympathy. 2 weeks. 14 days since the party. The Glass Tower conference room overlooked downtown Austin. December morning light, cold against the windows. Edmund Griffith sat across from me, 63, iron gray hair, swept back reading glasses, perched on a nose that had spent 40 years reviewing contracts for people whose families tried to destroy them. Sterling Holdings' senior corporate attorney. The man who'd filed the emergency motions that froze Vivienne's access before the FBI finished reading her rights. "The court order came through this morning," Edmund said, opening the first folder with movements economical as a surgeon's. "Every forged document is being destroyed under judicial supervision. Your original trust votes are restored in full. Vivienne Harrington is removed from all Sterling Holdings documentation, board records, officer listings, shareholder agreements, everything." I should have felt something. Triumph, maybe. Vindication. Justice. I felt tired. "There's one more matter," Edmund said, pulling a second folder from his briefcase. Leather worn at the corners, the kind of case that had seen 1,000 conference rooms like this one. "You asked me to draft a new trust. For your grandson, Leo, 8 years old. The boy who'd tried to save my life and blamed himself when I was too proud to listen." Edmund opened the folder. More documents. More signatures required. The machinery of law grinding forward, reshaping the future 1 paragraph at a time. The trust documents were 47 pages. I read every word. Age 8. The child I'd barely known until 3 weeks ago when Vivienne dropped him at the gates like an inconvenient package. The terms were simple. $38 million in liquid assets, the exact amount Vivienne had tried to steal, reclaimed from her accounts by court order. Education funding sufficient for any university, any degree, any path he chose. And the critical piece, voting shares. Controlling interest in Sterling Energy Holdings held in trust until his 25th birthday, managed by trustees I'd selected for competence instead of bloodline. Brent's name appeared in the trustee section. Not as beneficiary, as guardian. Protector. The role he should have had from the beginning. "You're bypassing your son entirely," Edmund observed. No judgment in his voice, just the lawyer's need for clarity. "If you're certain." "I'm certain," I said. Brent stayed loyal when it cost him everything. But Leo saved my life. The child who watched his mother plant poison and still found the courage to warn me. He gets the company. He gets the future. Edmund nodded once, slid a pen across the table. Mont Blanc black lacquer heavier than it looked. The signature pages were flagged with yellow tabs. I signed the first one. Russell Harrington grantor. The second. The third. Each stroke of the pen transferring wealth and power and responsibility to a boy who still played with action figures and believed the world could be fair if you tried hard enough. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's what it took someone young enough to still believe. 2 a.m. The conference room was dark except for the desk lamp Edmund had switched on before leaving. City lights sprawled below Austin sleeping except for the bars on 6th Street and the hospitals where people fought smaller battles than mine. I signed the last page. Dated it December 9th. Slid the documents back into the folder and sat there, pen still in my hand, thinking about Leo at 2 a.m. the morning after the party. Brent had told me. How Leo couldn't sleep. How he'd sat in the guest room convinced it was his fault I'd been poisoned, because he hadn't explained better, hadn't made me listen, hadn't saved me fast enough. 8 years old and carrying guilt that would break men twice his age. The boy who blamed himself for my pride. I pulled out my phone, found Brent's contact, typed, "Bring Leo tomorrow, 3 p.m. Tell him we're going to play chess. Don't tell him why." Dad. Sent. The city lights blurred. I blinked, cleared my vision, and stood. The trust documents stayed on the table. Edmund would file them in the morning, make them official, lock Leo's future into the legal machinery that protected fortunes from the people who built them. Tomorrow I'd tell an 8-year-old boy he was inheriting an empire. Tonight I'd let him think we were just playing chess. How do you reward a man who stayed loyal when loyalty became a death sentence? I asked Hugh Whitaker to meet me in the study Wednesday morning. December 10th. 3 weeks since the party. The estate manager arrived at 9 sharp, posture, straight hands clasped behind his back the way he'd stood for 12 years whenever I called him in to discuss household matters. 58 years old, gray, threading through brown hair, the kind of quiet competence that made a household run so smoothly you forgot someone was running it. "Hugh," I said, "sit down." He sat, hands on his knees, waiting. "For 12 years you've managed this household better than anyone I've hired," I said. "Monday morning, you're head of household operations with full authority and corresponding salary. 80,000 base plus discretionary budget. No one countermands you. Not family. Not me." Hugh blinked once. "Sir, I'm only doing my job." "That's right," I said. "And that's exactly why." Silence filled the space between us. The study smelled like leather and old books, and the coffee Hugh had brought on a tray without being asked. Lake Travis sat beyond the windows, December water gray as steel. "You stayed," I continued, meeting his eyes, "after the headlines. After you learned the woman who signed your paychecks tried to murder me. You stayed and ran this house like none of it happened. You think I don't notice? I notice everything, Hugh. Always have. And what I notice is this: the people who talk about loyalty usually don't have it. The people who have it don't talk. They just show up. Every morning, 9 sharp, for 12 years. Hugh's throat worked. "Thank you, sir." "Start Monday," I said. "Personnel files are yours. Budget authority is yours. If you need anything, ask. If you don't, I'll know the household's in good hands." He stood, shook my hand with a grip that didn't try to prove anything, left without another word. I watched him go and thought about the values I'd built an empire on. Flashy competence, bold vision. Hugh Whitaker wasn't flashy. He was present. That's what I'd missed for 72 years, the difference between performance and presence. Between people who knew how to be trusted and people who earned it by showing up when showing up cost them everything. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe you don't learn what matters until what doesn't almost kills you. Friday morning, I had them move the desk. The old digital signature desk walnut $16,000 custom drawer that nearly killed me went into storage. The new one was maple, lighter, simpler. No false bottom, no hidden compartment, no technology I didn't understand. They positioned it 3 feet left of where the old one stood. Same wall, same view of Lake Travis through the windows. Different angle. The desk moved 3 feet left. Everything changed. Nothing changed. I sat in the leather chair and looked at the lake. Morning sun hit the water at a slant I'd never seen from this office, turning the surface to hammered silver. Same lake I'd watched for 20 years. Different light. Same lake, I said aloud to the empty room. Different man looking at it. An ordinary pen sat on the desk blotter. Black plastic, the kind you bought in a 12-pack at Office Depot. No inlays. No engraving. No weight of false history. Just a pen that wrote when you needed it to write. I opened the top drawer. The paper sat inside folded once college-ruled notebook page I'd pulled from Leo's backpack the night I signed the trust documents. My handwriting filled both sides, steadier at the top, shakier toward the bottom, where exhaustion and emotion had blurred the lines. I unfolded it, read, Lesson 1. Trust is earned in years and lost in seconds. Lesson 2. The people who save you are rarely the ones you expect. Lesson 3. Pride is a tax on wisdom. I paid it for 72 years. Lesson 4. Children see the truth, adults explain away. Listen. Then the 5th lesson added this morning before Hugh arrived. The handwriting shook worse than the other's ink pressed deep enough to dent the paper. Lesson 5. Tell the truth, especially when it costs you everything you have left. 5 lessons. 72 years to learn them. 3 weeks to write them down. 43 years to build trust. 3 weeks to rebuild a life. Tomorrow, 1 conversation to change everything. I folded the paper along the crease and placed it back in the drawer. Closed it. The drawer slid shut with a whisper of wood on wood, no electronic click, no hidden mechanisms. Tomorrow was Saturday. Brent would bring Leo at 3 p.m. like I'd asked. We'd set up the chessboard, the old wooden set, not the crystal one Vivienne gave me last Christmas, that probably cost more than Hugh's annual salary. Leo would sit across from me expecting a game, and I would teach him, not by showing him this paper. Not by reading these lessons like scripture, turning hard-earned truth into a lecture that would bore an 8-year-old and miss the point entirely. I would live them, starting with the hardest one. Lesson 5. Tomorrow I'd tell Leo the truth about the inheritance, about the trust documents that made him the heir to Sterling Energy Holdings, about his mother planting poison and his father's loyalty, and why an 8-year-old boy who blamed himself for a party now owned the future I'd spent 50 years building. I'd tell him the truth, even though it would cost me the last comfortable lie I had left, that I could protect him from knowing how broken his family was. The truth would hurt him. The silence would destroy him. So tomorrow I'd choose truth. I looked at the lake one more time. The sun had shifted, turning the water from silver to pale gold light, catching the ripples like scattered coins. Tomorrow, I said to the empty office, to the new desk, to the man I was trying to become. Tomorrow, I teach him what I learned too late. I opened the drawer one last time, looked at the folded paper. 5 lessons in shaking handwriting. Then I closed the drawer and left it there. Leo's fingers hovered over the white knight with the kind of serious concentration that made him look less like an 8-year-old and more like someone who'd learned too young that choices have consequences. Saturday afternoon, December 13th. The wooden chessboard sat on the small table by the study window, winter sunlight slanting across the pieces. My grandson sat across from me, Leo Carter, 8 years old, dark hair falling across his forehead, brown eyes studying the board with an intensity that reminded me of Brent at that age, before the world taught him to second-guess everything. Leo wore jeans and a blue sweater sleeves pushed up to his elbows, legs swinging slightly because his feet didn't quite reach the floor. The boy who'd screamed a warning at my birthday party. The boy who'd saved my life. The boy who now owned my company's future, though he didn't know it yet. Hugh sat in the corner armchair with tea watching us. The way he'd watched this household for 12 years present, but unobtrusive, ready if needed. Content to be forgotten if not. The study smelled like leather and lake water, and the faint vanilla of the cookies Hugh had brought on a tray Leo hadn't touched yet. White moves first, I said. Only unchangeable rule in this room. Leo moved a center pawn forward 2 squares. Classic opening. Textbook. Grandpa, he said, eyes still on the board. Are the other rules changeable? I moved my own pawn to mirror his. Every single one. That's what I'm learning. He looked up then. Met my eyes. Something passed between us, understanding maybe or recognition. The kind of moment that doesn't need words, because words would only make it smaller. We played, not in strangers' silence, the awkward kind, that begs to be filled with weather talk and forced questions about school. The comfortable quiet of 2 people who didn't need to perform for each other. Leo's knight came out. My bishop. His pawn structure tightened. Mine spread. Outside the window, Lake Travis caught the afternoon light and threw it back in silver fragments. A boat crossed the water wake, spreading in perfect V-shapes that dissolved into ripples. The clock on the mantel ticked. Leo chewed his lower lip, considering his next move. I'd built an empire on certainty, on knowing the rules and playing them better than anyone else. 50 years of board meetings and contract negotiations and strategic decisions that moved millions of dollars with a signature. 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew everything. Today, an 8-year-old was teaching me about regret. Leo advanced his queenside knight. Captured my bishop. Didn't gloat, didn't apologize. Just made the move and sat back waiting. I studied the board. He'd opened a line I hadn't seen coming. Smart. Patient. The kind of strategy that didn't announce itself until it was already working. Grandpa, Leo said. Voice quiet, eyes still on the board. Are you sad about my mother? The question landed like a stone in still water. Ripples spreading outward, disturbing everything. I moved my rook. Bought myself 3 seconds to find the truth. Yes, I said. Sad about what happened, but not sad because truth was told. Leo's hand moved to his knight. Hesitated. I'm sad too, but I don't regret yelling. I knew, I said, meeting his eyes across the chessboard. I saw it in your eyes that very night. His fingers closed around the knight, moved it. You saw it. The moment you screamed, I said, before anyone else reacted, before your mother performed her embarrassment. I saw your face, Leo. You weren't trying to get attention. You weren't confused. You knew exactly what you saw, and you knew I needed to know. But you didn't listen, he said. No accusation in his voice, just fact. No, I agreed. I didn't listen. Pride is expensive, Leo. I paid for mine with 3 days in a hospital and a family that doesn't exist anymore. He nodded slowly, looked back at the board. Your move, Grandpa. I moved. He countered. The game tightened, pieces disappearing from the board positions, clarifying. His queen came alive, cutting diagonal lines across the battlefield. My king retreated square by square, running out of safe spaces. When did he stop being a child and become the wisest person in my family? Maybe when he chose truth over safety. Maybe when he screamed a warning, knowing no one would believe him. Maybe the moment he was born, and I'd just been too distant to notice. Leo's queen slid across the board, stopped 1 square from my king. Check, he said quietly. I looked at the position. Saw the trap 3 moves ahead. My king had nowhere to go that his queen couldn't follow. My remaining bishop was blocked. My knight was too far away. He'd won, not because I let him, not because I made mistakes to boost his confidence. He'd played better chess, seen further ahead, built a strategy that collapsed my defenses, move by careful move. I tipped my king over. The piece clicked against the wooden board, surrendering. "Checkmate," I said. Leo looked at the position. No triumph in his expression, no pride. Just the same serious concentration he'd worn since his fingers first hovered over that white knight. "Good game, Grandpa," he said. "Excellent game," I corrected. He almost smiled. Then his expression shifted, becoming something else. Older, more uncertain. "Grandpa," Leo said, "Dad said you wanted to tell me something important." My hand rested on the fallen king. The study was quiet, except for the clock and the distant sound of Hugh collecting the tea tray. The drawer with the 5 lessons sat 10 feet away. The trust documents with Leo's name sat in Edmund Griffith's office. The entire empire I'd built sat waiting for this moment. I looked at the boy who'd beaten me at chess, the boy who'd saved my life, the boy who was sad but didn't regret telling truth. "Leo," I said, "would you like to learn how to run a company?" The gravel crunched under Brent's tires, then went quiet. I stood at the study window until the sedan disappeared behind the oak trees at the end of the long drive. Leo's face had been visible through the rear glass, small, serious, already thinking about something. Probably the chess game. Probably the question I hadn't fully answered. "Would you like to learn how to run a company?" He'd said yes without hesitating. 8 years old and no hesitation. I turned from the window and sat down at the new desk. Maple. Plain. Nothing hidden in it. The afternoon light came through at a different angle than I'd ever seen from this room, 3 feet of distance, a completely different view of the same lake I'd looked at for 20 years. The drawer held 1 folded page, 5 lessons in unsteady handwriting. I didn't open it. I already knew what it said. What I kept thinking about was the chess game itself, not the ending, but the middle. The long, quiet stretch where Leo played without speaking, reading the board, committing to moves he'd thought through 3 turns ahead. No performance, no showing off, just work. That was what I'd built an empire failing to recognize. The people who did the work without announcing it. Hugh, who'd kept this household running through the worst 3 weeks of its history without being asked twice. Brent, who'd carried the weight of what he knew alone for 21 days because he was trying to protect everyone at once. Clayton, who'd installed 4 cameras on a separate system and said nothing until the footage proved him right. And Leo, who'd screamed in a room full of adults who didn't want to listen. None of them had needed an audience. I picked up the ordinary pen from the desk blotter, black plastic, the kind that came 12 to a pack, and pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the drawer. At the top I wrote what I owe them, below it 1 name at a time, what each person had done, what it had cost them, what I intended to do about it. Not a speech, not a toast at a dinner, just a list of debts written down honestly by a man who had finally learned the difference between building something and deserving it. The lake went gold outside the window. I kept writing. "And to you listening to my story, remember this: the warning you dismiss today might be the one that saves your life tomorrow." I spent 72 years building an empire on certainty. I thought I knew my family better than anyone. I thought loyalty was something you earned through success and provision. Don't make my mistake. Don't let your pride silence the people trying to save you. The lesson I learned is this: listen first, judge later. The people trying to destroy you will perform perfectly. They'll smile, plan, make you feel safe while planting poison. But the people trying to save you, they'll scream even when no one believes them. Family stories, revenge like mine, aren't about getting even. They're about learning who deserves your trust. I believe God put me through this to teach me what 43 years couldn't, that truth sounds desperate because it is. And sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest warning. I want to hear from you. Have you ever ignored a warning you shouldn't have? Have you experienced family stories, revenge, where the people you trusted most turned out to be strangers? Drop a comment below. Your perspective might help someone else. If this story resonated with you, please share it. And if you want more family stories, revenge, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: certain elements of this story have been fictionalized to protect privacy and strengthen the lesson. What's real is the message: listen to the warnings even when they come from the smallest voices.